Number one misses all the time. But I noticed, the relative compression test, I got one bad example and I couldn't get any more than just that one. So my sense was that cranking current and cranking vacuum were probably not going to help me. But I did think an appropriate test was a running vacuum. So
Very
now
good.
we're going to look at a slightly different issue. You're going to notice, we've only had two case studies. You'll notice after this case study, I'm following a trend. And the trend that I'm following is I decided for this class not to talk about all the oddball exceptions that I've run into over the years. And I mean, there's the more you do anything in this business, the more oddball stuff you see. I wanted to talk more about what I would call the bread and butter of what busts or what breaks on engines. And you're already kind of got a sense of this. A lot of times it's on the exhaust side. Not always on the exhaust side, but a lot of times it's on the exhaust side. I mean, I'm not talking about cam timing issues or valves that don't open, but when it comes to leakage and such. So anyway, we have a Ford Coyote here. It's a 2019 F-150 with about 125,000 miles on it. And cylinder number one misfires. This is what the shop tells me. Now, the shop also tells me they have done numerous compression tests on cylinder number one and a few other cylinders. And cranking compression is always perfect. This is what they tell me. And they have done the ignition swap, which is of course never a bad idea. So they've moved plugs and coils, didn't replace any, but they've moved them. That didn't help. And I think they decided, well, if it wasn't ignition, it wasn't mechanical, that it's got to be injection. And these are tricky, as you know, because this was one of the gasoline engines in which Ford uses dual fuel. Like a Toyota, for example. So it's a dual fuel engine. So they put a port injector and a direct injector in cylinder number one. And unfortunately, that did not help. And they've told me, when I talked to them on the phone first, that I asked them, well, when is it missing? Under what conditions? And they said primarily at lower RPMs, and maybe once you get above 2,000, the mist kind of goes away, or at least the ability to feel something goes away. So I get there. They have the vehicle inside for me. It's not really warmed up. I hook up the scan tool. I'm getting organized and things of this nature. And I hook up the scan tool. I pull some codes, and just like they told me, I have a continuous memory DCC. I got some pending. Got a freeze frame. I got a 316 misfire on cold start. I got a misfire on cylinder number one, and I start the vehicle. And in retrospect, I probably shouldn't have done this first, but it's kind of what I typically do. So no excuses. I did it. So I'm in the power balance screen. I fire it up. It's fast idle. You can see the 1250 RPM. So the engine's kind of cold, kind of fast idle, and sure enough, this thing is missing. Got a pretty good miss to it. It's a V8, obviously, but it's got a pretty good miss to it. And you can see, for those of you that are familiar with the IDS, there's absolutely no gray. The gray is historical. There's absolutely no gray here at all. It's all down here. Number one is always missing. It's missing. It's missing. It's missing. So I say, okay, it's number one. And I say to myself, I'm going to come back to this. I'm going to look at some scan data. I'm going to look at some fuel trims. I'm going to look at the trim on these dual fuel engines. You can look at direct injection trim independently of port injection trim. So I had a laundry list of things in my notes that I wanted to look at on this engine. But eventually, I worked my way back. With an IDS, you can have multiple screens open, and I'm kind of going back and forth. You can see the RPM now is coming down, but number one is still missing. Just number one. It never once shows lack of a misfire. It's always misfire. And eventually, I get to the point where now the engine is kind of warmed up. The RPM is kind of normal, and number one is missing away. And by the time I've gotten here, I have not really seen anything in scan data, like in terms of trims or anything like that, that suggests there's a problem. Now, these engines do not have mass airflow sensors. They are speed density. And I do look very closely at manifold pressure, and it seemed reasonable for the Chicago area. So I didn't see a problem there either. And then I decided to do a relative compression test. And this is what I wish I would have done as soon as I got in the vehicle. But unfortunately, I didn't. Now, it just happened to be I'm sitting in the F-150, I'm looking at data, and I'm getting ready to do this test. And the tech that I know, kind of my contact there, walks up to me. He's hanging on the driver's side door with the window down, and we're talking a little bit. He says, "Well, what do you know?" I go, "Well, all I really know is that number one is misfiring." And I tell him I'm getting ready to do the relative compression test. And he tells me that he has an aftermarket scan tool, I forgot the name of it, that does the same type of test. And I know aftermarket scan tools do it. He says, "Oh, we've done that test. We've done that test multiple times. Never once did we have low compression." And I said, "Okay." So I do it. This is the first time I do it. And sure enough, I have low compression. I can hear it. He can hear it. He says, "Wait a second, what just happened?" I go, I did the cranking test, and cylinder number one's got low compression. Not horribly, but it's got lower compression. He goes, "That's never happened before." And I caught this one time, and I did it 6 or 7 more times, never got it to occur again. It occurred just one time. Now, it was purely luck. And I wondered if I had done that cold, would I have gotten it to occur a little bit more frequently? I wondered if time was a component, temperature, I should say. Or then I wondered, was it oil pressure related? By now the oil has gotten thinner. I'm trying to figure out what the variable was because they've told me it's always had good compression. So number one misses all the time. The shop has done a compression test. And again, I always take the words of a shop. I always, acknowledge what they tell me, but it doesn't drive my procedure. If I think I should do compression, I'll do compression. But I noticed, the relative compression test, I got one bad example and I couldn't get any more than just that one. So my sense was that cranking current and cranking vacuum were probably not going to help me. So that's probably not a good use of my time. Now, don't get me wrong, it doesn't take that long to do it, but I didn't do it. I just didn't think that was an appropriate test based on what I was told, based on what I saw. But I did think an appropriate test was a running vacuum. So service information kind of gives me the layout of the intake. And surprisingly, on this Coyote engine, there are 3 pretty good choices in the front of the engine. So I decided to go with the purge port. So obviously that's the purge solenoid. That's the hose. I have it disconnected here and you can see it's open right there. So I went with purge, but you can see there's some other choices that would be pretty good as well. So I connect up, again, using a spark plug boot. I am in Zoom 3 and I'm going to sync off an ignition event and I'm going to do a running vacuum. So not cranking current, not cranking vacuum, right to running vacuum. I look up the firing order because I haven't memorized these Coyotes, and I do it. This is running. The engine is running. And I'm showing you this movie for a couple of reasons. First reason, imagine all you had in front of you was red, that all you had was a transducer. You would say, my gosh, that thing's got great repeatable intake stroke pulls. I mean, these things are repeating all the time. The amplitude, the depth, the shape, the angles, it looks really good. But then I would remind you, as I reminded myself, well, right down here, this is number one. And in between the blues, there should be 8 intake strokes. There should be 8 pulls between them, not one big one. And those of you that have been doing this analysis have a pretty darn good idea what's wrong. I mean, I don't expect you to say, "Oh, that's the part you got to replace," but you probably have a pretty good idea what's happening here. The rest of us now, we're going to figure this out. So in your handout, I gave you the screen. So this is, again, running vacuum. And I am comparing this to my number one ignition coil primary voltage. And again, just to emphasize, between here and here, there should be 8 pulls. So you could easily argue, well, there aren't any, I can't really see any pulls at all. Now, don't get me wrong. I see this. I see this transition point. It's repeatable, seems to be in the same spot every time. I see that, but I don't see clearly defined pulls. That does not mean we can't do the analysis. We can still do the analysis. And I've already kind of prepped you on this. So I'm going to continue to open this up. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm going to continue to describe what appears to be good versus what is bad. So the level of vacuum is increasing. So from that point down to here is good. Again, ideally they should be at the same horizontal level, but we have a significant failure in this engine for sure. So the fact that my arrows are going down, I would say that that is good. Vacuum is moving in the right direction. However, the other direction is bad. We have a loss of vacuum or we have an increase in pressure. This is the in-between point right there. I need to identify that point to go further. Now, I might already have, and you might already have a pretty good idea what that cylinder is, but we got to do it anyway. So I'm going to zoom in, get organized, good zeros. Again, I've triggered on cylinder number one. I'm going to put on my rulers. This is an 8-cylinder engine, 720 divided by 8. We're going to have 90-degree slices. Remember that term from last night? We have 90-degree slices. So the number one intake stroke is 360 degrees later. So this will be number one. And then I think it's 3-4, something like that, or 3-7. So the rest of the firing order then appears. So remember what we discussed. When we're doing this with 6 cylinders and especially with V8s, when you use rulers or overlays, whatever the heck they're called, on a V8, you are looking at a 90-degree slice of the intake. The intake stroke is 180 degrees. Top to bottom is 180 degrees. The intake valve event is probably 200 to 260-ish. So what you are looking at for number one is just a small piece. And it's important to understand that because now I might ask the question, well, number one is the misfiring cylinder. The problem occurs on the number one intake stroke. Why is cylinder number 3 and cylinder number 7 appear to be affected? Why do I see an increase in pressure through 1, through 3, and into 7 before it transitions back down? Well, we know why. Because we have to look at the intake valve event. Now, Ford does not publish camshaft specifications at all. So when we did the GM yesterday, I went to Summit. And an L86, like a Coyote, is considered to be a performance engine. And there's a lot of aftermarket performance parts for these engines. So I can get the duration kind of easily. And I believe this is reasonably accurate. So at 50 thousandths inch lift, our intake duration on a Coyote is about 260 degrees. So I make a yellow box that represents 260 degrees of width. So each one of these is 90. That'd be 180. That would have been 270 if I go on the entire thing. So I got about a 260-degree box. Now notice I shifted a little bit to the left. So notice that the left edge here doesn't line up with my 360-degree marker. Because I'm thinking to myself, not that I know this, but I'm thinking to myself, well, this is a Coyote engine. It's powerful. It's a big breather. It's got a lot of duration. Chances are the engine has overlap, and that intake valve is probably actually opening at the end of the exhaust stroke. Where? I don't really know. But I'm going to take some liberties, and I'm going to move it a little bit to the left. Now, maybe it needs to go more to the left. I don't really know, but I moved it a little bit to the left. But my point is that 260-degree duration, that's the entire intake valve event. So now I can explain this better. I can say, yes, a problem in cylinder number 1 that is occurring as long as the intake valve is open in cylinder number 1, the entire duration, the entire event will impact number 3 and number 7, and things will get better once we move to number 2. So this is occurring during the intake stroke of number one. Well, if I'm thinking about my big three for sealing, and I want you to think about all the other clues here, that chances are this is not a crankcase ventilation issue. When let me rephrase that. This is not a piston rings cylinder wall issue. This is a valve sealing issue. And it's not the intake valve. You know why? Intake valves don't leak when they're open. So my sense is that I'm probably dealing with an exhaust valve concern. That is the mental process that I'm using to walk through this. So the shop and I talked. I said that this is about as far as I can take this right now. So I said that, and the shop that I'm dealing with, while they don't do this, they've seen me do this before, so they're familiar with the process. So I kind of explained to them how I move towards the exhaust and how if there was a problem with exhaust valve sealing, it would impact multiple cylinders in the cranking vacuum pattern. And it would give us pretty poor idle quality. And we do have pretty poor idle quality. So I didn't know what was wrong. Now I have diagnosed this particular issue on a Coyote before, but that doesn't mean that's what's going to be wrong today. So I said that really you have to kind of think about everything between the camshaft, the lobes on the camshaft, the exhaust lobes on the camshaft, all the way to the exhaust valve and to the seat, and everything in between. So I don't think we have a valve that's burnt, which usually means a chunk of the valve is broken off. Why don't I think that? Because the cranking current, the cranking compression, for the most part, was pretty good. I mean, one time I had, as you saw, low compression. So I don't think there was a chunk of the valve missing. I mean, could there be a guide issue? Yeah, I guess there could be a guide issue. But I don't really think the valve is walking around much. I don't think that's what this is. I was thinking that maybe there's a lash adjuster issue. Maybe oil gets in the lash adjuster, to act as the take up for the hydraulic cushioning. And maybe the oil can't get out. It comes in, but it doesn't exit properly. And maybe the lash adjuster is pumped up a tad and it keeps the exhaust valve open. Or maybe you could have a broken valve spring. And I said it kind of like I said it just now. Or maybe it could be a broken valve spring. And they said, John, thanks. And they were going to investigate it further. Anyway, they were kind enough to send me this picture. First thing that I'm impressed with is how clean the engine is. I mean, my gosh, that thing is for 126,000 miles. That's pretty nice inside here. But anyway, as you can see, it's a broken valve spring. Now, as you heard me say last night, what we never want to do is look at a pattern and say this pattern means a broken exhaust valve spring. That we don't want to do that. We may connect dots as time goes on. When you do your first 10, you're not really connecting any dots. But when you do 100, maybe you've done 1,000, you're starting to connect some dots. So there's nothing wrong with that. But certainly we don't want to look at a pattern and say, well, this guy in the class said he had one of these patterns. I've got the same pattern. He had a broken valve spring. That's probably what's wrong with the vehicle. Maybe, maybe not. So I did go in cylinder. Completely unnecessary. Educational. And I have read, I'm not going to point fingers anywhere or anything like that, but I have read that some folks believe that in cylinder analysis is all that you need to determine what's wrong with a gasoline engine, and that we should focus on in cylinder. You have a mechanical problem, pull a coil, pull a plug, go in cylinder. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm an in cylinder fan, or I wouldn't be doing a class later in the year. So I use it, but I do not believe every problem can be seen in cylinder. Cam timing problems can, valves that don't open problems can, certain repetitive failures can, but I'm going in cylinder and I want to show you what you see here and what you don't see. So I go in cylinder, this thing's fully warmed up now. So, the problem is there. And I go in number one and I fire it up. So it's a crank to run transition and ignoring the first pulse. But my second one is maybe 240, 190, 150. It's dropping down kind of as they normally do, but this thing drops really low, below 50 psi. So I'm going to start to zoom in, and my running compression is a dismal 35 psi. So yes, If I do a running compression, I will be able to say, oh, this cylinder has got a problem. It's got really low compression. There's something that's creating a leak. I don't know where the leak is. Now, this analysis is not meant to be super thorough, but I'm going to hit the big ones. So I'm going to try to analyze this quickly. I'm going to zoom in, put on some rulers. I already know my compression is low. So the transducer gave me that. It gave me low pressure. I guess what I'm trying to figure out is, can I look at this and tell you that I have an exhaust valve sealing issue? I would never say, can I look at this and tell you that I have a broken valve spring? But do I have an exhaust valve sealing issue? Well, one of the things I notice is that the tower, as we go up and as we go down, they should be symmetrical. But you'll notice here as we're going down on what would be expansion, this one's slightly more vertical. Vertical is not the best word, but there's more time difference from here to here than there is to there. So it's slightly leaning, which is an indication of a leak. But you could say, well, at 35 psi, probably have a leak. So that's not particularly helpful. I can measure when the exhaust valve opens. I can see that the exhaust valve opens. It's about 64 degrees before bottom dead center. Not a bad number. It's clear. It's occurring. It's in the same spot. I went through the entire thing. It's holding steady. I have a good looking exhaust stroke. The point at which the deepest vacuum in the cylinder is first reached is about 58 degrees after top dead center. That's reasonable. That's good. My intake valve closing is around 73 degrees after bottom dead center. Now you could argue, well, that's a little bit late compared to a lot of engines, but this thing's got phasing, cam phasing. So this cam can advance when it's appropriate. So that's not a bad number. And I pull some decent vacuum levels. I've got good depth on the expansion stroke, and I have good depth on the intake stroke. Here's my point. I went in cylinder and it had no benefit. It didn't tell me what my running vacuum told me. So my point is that every test has its place, but I really think that if you're thinking about this analysis, that starting with cranking current and cranking vacuum and running vacuum is a good beginning. If you think you should go in cylinder, and there's plenty of good reasons to, by all means. And if you want to go in cylinder for educational, which is what I do frequently, by all means. But in cylinder does not have all the answers.